Sí. Sí. Good morning, everyone.
Buenos días a todos.
Tercer día de la Time Use Week 2022. Hoy tenemos una primera sesión durante esta mañana sobre la regulación del tiempo de trabajo, cuáles son las lecciones que hemos aprendido hasta ahora y también las perspectivas de futuro. Os recuerdo rápidamente que el hashtag de las redes sociales es Time Use Week, para quienes estáis publicando en redes. Y para comenzar, quiero dar la bienvenida a la profesora Margarita León Borja, es la directora académica del Centre Ernest Lluch de la Universidad Internacional Menéndez Pelayo. Bienvenida, Marga.
Pelayo. Good morning to all of you. I shall be very, very brief because I certainly do not wish to be the protagonist. Let me thank Marta Junque and her team who have organized an excellent seminar from many different vantage points. Within there's the two seminars, one this time round and one on the 17th of January, which will be centered on a time use survey carried out by the National Statistics Institute as like a ordered by the government of Spain, and to have a sort of reliable data with a view to preparing a legislation. And WIMP will be organising both those events. So if we look at all the fora in this week, so this is important because we wish to connect research in different fields of knowledge concerning time, and then there are considerable efforts of public policy, which often are at a micro level. We're talking of policies at a municipal level or even at a neighborhood or borough level. And sometimes we have difficulties to be fully knowledgeable about all these small initiatives. So it would be good not just to share the theoretical discussions, but also practical examples, practical efforts to implement in practical terms policies which have to do with time uses. I would like to believe that the day when we talk of time uses in and the rest of politics which regulate our lives, not when we talk of time use, when we talk of policies in sort of life at work, education, pensions, transitions, which frame our lives and which are highly conditioned by social policies and urban or land use planning policies, the organization and design of our cities, when we can, in a cross-cutting manner, can discuss the use of time and how designs affect, or these different policies affect our use of time, then we will have taken a quantum leap forward. But we're not there yet. And therefore, maybe we're looking for a new sort of framework, which from more symbolic viewpoints will provide visibility to issues and problems of managing time and, if you like, ensuring a work-life balance. Well, hopefully, when that happens, there will be a sequence of making visible what today is going to be treated throughout the rest of this week. And again, we'll also looking at that in January. Now let me hand over to Marta Junqué. She's going to explain what we're going to be doing today in a bit more detail. Also, I'd like to welcome those who are following us from home or from their workplace on streaming. And I'd like to thank Professor Kiyu Chang, who I have known for some years now, quite a privilege. We all work together in academia, for being here with us. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Juni. Muchas gracias, Marga.
Thank you, Marga. Thank you, all of you. There are three very brief things I'd like to say in this brief introduction, which I'm delighted to do. First one is to thank everyone. The second one is to explain to you this vocation we have always wished to have, to bring together science and politics and policy making, and then tell you what we're going to be doing today. Today is we will have debates, discussions. There'll be keynote speakers who will share their knowledge, their expert knowledge with us. But today, all the persons who are following us here and out in the cloud can participate. It's a discussion and debate day. So let me kick off by thanking the CUIMPB, the Ernest Luke Center, because it's great that the first time we'll be able to work with academia, with the university, to organize a section of this time. I'd like to thank Marga Leon, Ignazi, and all those who are involved in the youth. And I'd also like to thank the speakers who are here. Today, the speakers, both in the panels we have this morning and the one in the afternoon, will be people from different backgrounds, the academic field, and they'll tell us what findings they have reached concerning the advances in organization of work and at the workplace, and public institutions will tell us what they have done so far and what they plan to do, with what purpose, to guarantee the right to enjoy use of time to all citizens. On Monday, the regional minister of Catalonia was telling us that to create a right, you do need many, many people who start, if you like, getting involved. And acts like today will allow us to bring together knowledge, findings from academia, from trade unions, from the business world, and put it all into the same pot, if you like. And hopefully that will allow us to move forward. And in particular, it will allow us to organize work time in a more balanced fashion. That's a concept which the ILO used to posit quite a few years ago, and we wish to move forward to that aspiration. So thanks ever so much for the speakers. I'd like to thank those of you who are following us either here in person, in particular those who have come here representing trade unions and the business organizations. It'd be great if you could tell us about your thoughts and share your thoughts with us. And then today we're going to start with a session where the purpose will be to discuss what has been done, what has been to regulate the use of time in the past and in the future. And we shall kick off with an opening presentation from our speaker, and she's going to explain to us the flexibility at work, benefits, or if you like, positive aspects and downsides. As this afternoon, as Marga said, the Spanish government during this legislature wishes to have on the statute book a law on time uses. So this afternoon, the different persons who are working as experts with BTUI have pondered different ideas which would incorporate. And I'd like to share with you these proposals. That shall be done this afternoon. And to conclude the session, what is very important for us is not just to talk with academia and institutions, but also listen to businesses, because it's vital. That's where most people work, in companies. And then we shall end up with an event organized by the Norse network with a view to share good practices carried out by companies, by corporations in this new post-pandemic period. Well, that's all really from me. Do enjoy today's event. Thank you again for your presence here. Thanks.
Gracias,
Thank you, Marta. And now,
Chun, onto the stage for a
Vamos a escuchar ahora nuestra ponencia inaugural a cargo de Yi-Jung Chung, profesora de Sociología y de Políticas Sociales en la Universidad de Kent. Le damos la bienvenida a la profesora Yi-Jung Chung.
Can we have the presentation up, please? So I've been given 30 minutes to kind of provide you what would really take days to kind of explain. But essentially, I'm going to try to give you a taster of what I say in the book, The Flexibility Paradox, but try to make this into kind of set the day for the rest of the day, which will be really about exciting new thoughts and experiments on working time. But essentially, I wanted to kind of try to start the provocation in a way of why we need to rethink working time and what we could do to try to ensure that we provide citizens with the right to time. Okay, so again, I think we're at a really crucial stage of humanity, if you want, of modern day, where we need to really reconsider what is working time and private time. And I would set the scene of why we need to do that, introducing my theory of the flexibility paradox, why the rise of flexible working will allow blurring of boundaries can be a real threat in terms of the retrenchment or the retraction of private time, increasing kind of competition amongst workers and increasing rather than decreasing inequality, both in gender and other aspects. And one of the two things that I want to kind of bring into explaining why this happens is about work-centric societies, or the idea of passion at work and the rise of insecurity. And to kind of conclude with what we can do in terms of the new age of work or new working time, where I consider the Dadaism of working time. So just very briefly, what is the flexibility paradox? That's a picture of my book there. So the flexibility paradox is this. So in very kind of rational choice theory, so if you have control over when and where you work, you would expect that people could just, just extend their leisure time. If you have control over the boundaries of work and family time, you expect, you just kind of dilly-dally. And there's still a lot of that in our heads. So it's like, if people work from home, it's like, you work from home, you're not as productive, you're not doing so much work. Or if you don't work the 9 to 5, 9 to 6 standard schedule, that you're not really working as hard or as efficient as other people. But in reality, and I'll show you just very briefly the actual kind of evidence of this, is that flexible workers, those people who have control over when and where they work longer and harder. And I know a lot of you are nodding here because you yourselves have been party to this paradox. So why does this happen? So there's a lot of theories, and I want to kind of try to first introduce some of the existing theories there. So imposed intensification is that once you don't have this very 9 to 5 schedules or working in the office, like employers could actually make workers do more work without having to pay overtime premiums or without going against labor laws such as the working time directives. So essentially it's that employers add more work. The second thing is about social exchange theory, essentially that, working flexibly, having the opportunity to work from home, but also work flexible schedules. So again, working a bit early, ending a bit early, working a bit late, and starting a bit early, late, and ending a bit late was still a gift. So because you have the gift and you won't want it to be taken away, you work harder and longer as an exchange for that gift. The third one is about the fact that if we don't have to commute, and I know for a lot of people who work in Barcelona, it could be for many hours in a day, that you have those extra hours gained because you're not commuting. You don't have to, make yourself all nice and pretty to go into the office. So you have that time left and you use that to kind of work a bit longer. And also because you don't have to do the commute, etc., you're less likely to be fatigued and you're less likely to get sick and the bit of reduced of absenteeism sickness. Now, I wanted to kind of go further than that, is that it's not just those reasons, that there is a bit of a trend that happened with the rise of flexible working. And that trend is the change in what we consider to be ideal workers. So with the introduction of flexible working, we've kind of had a change in the way we think about work and what a good worker should be like. And this also came with the rise of digitalization, where, many of us carry our offices in our hands and in our pockets, where we could always pluck it out and delve right into work. Now, that can be great. It could be incredibly empowering. And I say also in the book how those kind of flexible working patterns enabled a lot of people who were unable to take part in the labor market to better take part in the labor market, such as mothers, such as people with disabilities. Now, the problem is, because of this rise of that blurring of boundary and the ease of going into work, we have this expectation that you should be always on, always available, that you should always be tethered into work at all times. And what we see is that there has been a vicious cycle of increased competition, of always people needing to be available on, to the point where it's like, also in a context where you need to be seen professionally, like as a professional, and to do that, you had to, let's say, respond to emails in 3 minutes, even if it's at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the evening, because that's what the new standard expects you to do. This has been accelerated, again, not just through flexible working, but with that other kind of performance measurements. Workers are being, measured in terms of performances more regularly through lots of different matrices, as well as, having pay now related to that performance outcomes of those workers. And this is really, these kind of patterns, initially, a lot of scholars said these are like professionals, like bankers or academics, if you want. But we see that that's kind of happening across the board. And I'll again show you the evidence of this later. But so what are some of the two reasons why workers, when given that freedom, rather than expanding their leisure, work harder and longer? And I find two real kind of main kind of causes that could really help us understand the social structures that make freedom at work more of, let's say, shackles, if you want. The first is about the work-centric society and passion at work. Now we're in a society where work is your passion, that you should be busy at work, because otherwise you're not really contributing to society. That you being busy at work, saying, for example, you meet a friend, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm busy. If you don't say you're busy, you're kind of, a bit of a loser. You're not really an important person. So you have to say that you're busy. To the point, it's not just to show others. It's also to show the confirmation of self-worth. If you don't feel like you're busy at work, you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? And this is, again, evidenced by a lot of psychological, social psychology studies, such as Beleza et al. What is more, if you look at some of the World Values Surveys, the International Survey programs, if you ask people, back in the days, in the 1970s, up to the 1980s, people said, oh, I work to earn a living, I enjoy my family time, I enjoy my leisure time. But now, work is where I find joy. Work is where I pursue my passion. or social justice, if you want. The problem with that passion is that there's a theory called passion exploitation, where if you're passionate at work, you don't need numerical compensation, that you can be exploited. Why? Because you like it. You're doing what you love. So why are we not doing more of it and more of it? So it's absolutely okay to exploit you. And you yourself use that logic to use the freedom at work to exploit yourself. To the point now, but it's not just professional. Even if you look at the very low pay elementary occupation, interesting job, having passion at work is now considered the norm. But it's not just that, it's about insecurity. And those things are really interrelated. We saw the demise of the collective bargaining power, such as the decline of unions across all of, like modern day society, really Western industrialized societies, but across the world. The welfare state has been, dismantled since the 1970s. We no longer have many, workers do not have income protection. And back in the days, in the golden days of the welfare state, people even had job protection, which is now being dismantled with the increase of lots of precarious jobs. And what that also has done is that we've individualized risk. Before, when the welfare state was in its golden era, it was the welfare states to provide income and job security for workers. You could rely on the state for that safety net. No longer. We now have to hold those risks ourselves. We are responsible for how marketable we are. We are responsible for making sure that we could sell our labor to make sure to get enough income. And again, this is kind of the idea of the recommodification of labor in modern day society. But let's just forget about those people. So let's forget about people who are insecure in the more traditional sense. How about those in the top position? Those who are in, let's say, permanent jobs, good income. How about them? They also feel insecure. It's the idea of the increased performance management that even those in very kind of secure jobs feel insecure about maintaining your position. Because again, with the rise of matrices, as well as the increase of performance management, that we always feel like we have to be on our toes, working all the time, pushing ourselves to the max. Otherwise, we are not as worthy. Now, this is where, looking at the time, I'm going to really breeze through some of the evidence. If you want to know more, you could buy my book, or you could see a lot of the open access papers that I have published around this. What I can say is, so does this actually show in the data? What we looked at is German longitudinal data, the German household panel study. We looked at UK household panel studies, where we look at individuals across time. You follow the individual and see what happens when they start working flexibly. What happens? They work longer hours. Other colleagues have looked at, American data, German data, et cetera, to look at what happens when you work from home. Same pattern, you work longer hours. There has been some experimental studies, especially not just professional, but routine workers, to see what happens when they work from home. They work longer. Why? They don't necessarily work longer hours, but they get rid of their breaks, as well as they have less distraction. So they end up working longer as well. Workers have been also shown to do more multitasking when they're working from home or working flexibly, and also more likely to have mental sleep spillover, which means a lot of those who are working flexibly, and again, I'm pretty sure a lot of you will identify with this, is that you think about, well, you can't get rid of work in your head. It's just constantly there without you being able to put it away. Now, one of the things that I wanted to say, and really important because I wanted to talk about the inequality patterns in terms of right to time. One thing we find is that men work longer overtime hours compared to women. Now, the question is then, is it men that are more likely to be exploited or experience the paradox? And we say, no, it's because you're looking at the wrong hours. Paid hours is just one part of hours, working hours. Unpaid work is as important. When we start looking at unpaid work, we realize it's actually women who exploit themselves more, both in the labor market and at home. So women end up doing more unpaid hours. So for example, in a German study conducted by Yvonne Lade, a good friend of mine, she shows that men increased their overtime hours 2 to 3 hours when they were working from home. Women increased their overtime hours as well, but just 1 hour, right? But what did? They increased their childcare hours by 3 hours. So they increased their work hours by 4 hours. So, but what happens then is, especially in situations where women are working from and men are not, women will end up doing more housework and childcare, exacerbating the inequality patterns that we see at home. What that also does is it stigmatizes women's flexible working. This is why more women will be penalized when they work from home or work flexibly compared to men, because of the social assumptions we have towards, well, first of all, women and mothers' work capacities, but especially when they're working from home, it will exacerbate the perception of them not being productive, which will increase the gender inequality patterns in the labor market. Oh, and then some also what we find is that with these overtime hours both at home and in the family, we see worse work-life balance outcomes for those who are working flexibly. So what do we do about this? There's so many things that I would like to say, but I'm going to talk really about the right to disconnect and right to time. First of all, I want to just first start off with explaining why the current labor laws are not efficient enough. So labor laws that we have at this moment in the majority of the countries, and I'm very happy to see that Barcelona and Catalonia and the Spanish government, they're all interested in changing some of these regulations. But it is built around almost like a factory work situation. Like you work a certain hour and you take a break, and you're working in the office or in your workspace. And it's really inefficient when we start blurring the ideas of what is the workspace, what is working time, when is working time. And so because when we have these flexible working arrangements, you realize that these boundaries of work and non-work time isn't as clear. I'm just going to skip that to the next one. Especially I've talked about the Dadaism of working time. Well, not just teleworking, but flexi time. So the question of working time becomes really tricky because back in the days, if you think about the office work, and just for flexible work, teleworking in particular, we expected that, okay, when you're in the office, that is working time. That's how we considered it. We didn't account for the fact that you don't necessarily always do work during your working hours. If you look at a survey in the UK before the pandemic, they were asking workers, what do you do in your working hours? So you're full-time workers, so 8 hours, 9 hours a day, what do you actually do? They worked real actual work, less than 3 hours a day. The reason was a lot of the time was spent doing other things. I'm not saying all of these other things are not meaningful, but I'm just saying that this working time becomes really tricky because actually a lot of the working hours are not necessarily that clear cut. So for example, with the voucher cloud, the workers' day, they spend time drinking coffee, reading the news, talking to their partners, et cetera, et cetera. But all of that was counted as working time. Now, if you put that in the household, in the home, workers themselves will not necessarily calculate all of those hours that they would have calculated in the office as working time. So we're really in a point where once work is now taken away from the office and into a private sphere, then we're really left with the question, what is working time? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What can you count? And who does those hours? And also maybe it's more about this. It may not necessarily about what is actually working time, but what is the impact of those expansion of the working time? So what I try to summarize here is essentially, rather than maybe trying to, again, because it is so messy, to try to calculate working time and then try to restrict the numbers of hours of work, maybe we need to turn the dialogue around to say, forget about working time per se. And I'm going to talk a bit later about, the ideas of work about, let's say work, we have to do certain things. It doesn't matter how many hours you work, you do that. But let's think about protecting private time and rest. How about, rather than trying to make a very kind of messy definition of working time that could be applied in this flexible age, why don't we start talking about rest time? And this is why I say we need the right to disconnect. So rather than saying, okay, this is your working hours and you shouldn't do more or less, they say, oh, no, from this point onwards, from here, that's your time. That's your private, secure time that you have the right to protect. So it is providing almost an artificial, stricter boundaries, again, in this era of flexibility. So it's enabling a right to rest, mandating protecting time away from work, both physically and mentally. And that doesn't mean that you can't work at 8 o'clock. So you can work, but you have the right to protect your time. It's the same thing as when you go on holiday, you can check your emails if you want, but you don't have to check your emails, right? This is what the strength of the right to disconnect is. But it also improves firm productivity if we are allowed to do this. Why? Because study after study shows that mental, physical time away from work is helping productivity rather than decreasing it. So in a way, as the Working Time Directive has tried to do with maximizing the working hours, what Right to Disconnect actually is not only about protecting workers, it's protecting managers from misusing labor force in the wrong way. And also what we're doing is we're ensuring that the rise of flexible working, remote working, etc., doesn't result in social costs. I think what labor laws have to do is to understand that certain actors, such as managers of certain organizations, even with the best intentions, may not necessarily see the costs that they produce. Individuals may not necessarily the cost that they produce. So let's say people who work very long hours, they might not understand the long-term repercussions, not only on themselves, their family, as well as society, in terms, it may be health costs, it may be social costs in terms of the relationship breakdown, the cost it has on the children, the impact on children. What labor laws then need to do is to make sure people make good choices. The right to disconnect, and again, I'll show you later with the rise of the use of 4-day working week, a 4-day week, is to try as a society address this issue that certain types of behaviors and working patterns are not good for social value or social costs. So we're trying to stop people from working very long hours, which actually results in, bad work-life balance, burnout, but also, again, social costs, not only for yourself, but your children and your family, and for society. Again, it could be higher cost for medical reasons, but also higher cost in terms of losing out a great chunk of the labor force due to these patterns. I think the right to disconnect is a good start, but I think we need to go a little bit further in terms of the 4-day week. One of the things I want to say is this. So the right to rest is also about social inequality. It's not just about individual workers, but it's also about considering who is able to rest now. I think there is a pattern of social inequality in terms of who is able to have leisure and who is able to rest. And perhaps the 4-day week is really about trying to readdress those inequality patterns so that the right to rest is not just given to workers, but to all workers. So one is about this, and one of the great things about the 4-day week that I would like to kind of highlight is that we need to reconfigure work. So back in the days, and up to now, we're still measuring work in terms of the hours you sit in front of the computer, and use that as a measure of productivity and commitment. So, those people who work very long hours in the office, they're committed. Those people who come to every meeting, they're committed. If those who have FaceTime with their managers, they're committed. And I think the fundamental thing about the 4-day week is to say, no, let's not do that. Let's completely reconfigure what productivity and motivation and what the key indices or the key targets we have to meet as a company, but also society is. It also helps us value non-paid work as valuable. So by shifting the work kind of division of hours from 40 to, let's say, the rest of the week, to really to say, okay, so we spend 4 days at work and 3 days at not work, we start valuing the things we do outside of work a bit more. It could be family time, leisure, and voluntary work. And then, that will help us shift away from the work-centric society. And again, one of the key things I wanted to say is that we're removing the division between those who work very long hours and those who don't work. So in our current day society, we still live in this, again, this ideal worker culture where being available all the time, being tethered to work is considered virtuous. We expect, especially like in certain occupations, that you should really devote yourself only to work very long hours. And that's considered virtuous. But it is incredibly exclusionary. There are certain people who can work long hours and those who cannot. And those tend to be those women with care responsibility, workers with care responsibility, disabled workers cannot work those long hours. So this is why it's very exclusionary. But once we start moving away from that culture, we might be able to start introducing more equality in terms of not only access to work, but also the value that non-work has. And also in terms of not only care work, but also in terms of other issues such as climate change. So, I mean, just to sum it up, before I come off the stage, and I mean, this is something that I've been asked a lot, it's like, so am I saying like we shouldn't work flexibly at all? Like, you know, like, because I spent quite a long time talking about how dangerous flexible working can be, working from home or having flexi time. But actually, again, one of the things we have to say is flexible working is a great enabler for those who had limited access to the labor market to really be able to gain access. So if you were able to work from home, work flexible schedules, you're more likely to take part in the labor market, and especially for those with other responsibilities, such as care responsibilities. Having said that, in this current social structure where work is your passion and we have insecurity, and digitalization has enabled us to be tethered into work all the time, this rise of flexible working is really increasing our tendency to work long hours in a hyper-competitive way and always be available and tethered on, which increases not only bad work well-being outcomes, but also inequality outcomes. And as I said, that isn't just harmful for individuals, but is very harmful for society as a whole. And the current labor laws, again, designed in the times where people were working in factories 9 to 5, isn't really going to cut it in terms of providing people with the right solution. So we need a stronger protection of rest times. And I think, again, right to disconnect may provide artificial boundaries to provide people with more right to say no to work, because at the moment, we just don't have that right as much. To just say no and say, this is my time for rest. But also 4-day week can help us really reconfigure the values at work and society to better use the really limited resource that we have, which we all share, which is called time. Okay, so that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And ahora tenemos un breve.
Okay, so we have some time. We have 15 minutes for questions and remarks by the audience to our speaker. There's someone there, Gonzalo.
Yes.
Oh, questions. All right. I didn't think there was a question and answer time, sorry.
Sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. A pleasure to.
Hola, ha sido un placer escucharla. Muchas gracias. Quisiera volver a la cuestión de qué es el horario laboral. Yo como antropólogo he tenido que trabajar sobre el tiempo de trabajo. Quisiera compartir una idea con usted y que creo que es uno de los problemas de esta reflexión. Está conectada con la temporalidad lineal con la que estamos acostumbrados a pensar sobre el tiempo, los días, los años. Cuando haces multitasking no puedes tener en cuenta esta acumulación de cosas que haces. Entonces tenemos que seguir reflexionando sobre el cómo contamos ese tiempo de trabajo. No se trata de pensar en horas. No es suficiente. Estamos multitasqueando. Y los días tienen más de 24 horas, por decirlo así. Esta es una idea que yo brindo para aportarla a esta reflexión. Esta es una reflexión muy interesante, filosófica. ¿Qué es el tiempo de trabajo? ¿Y qué es la temporalidad? Hay distintas situaciones en las que puede haber una intensidad y uno se siente bajo presión. La temporalidad del tiempo no transcurre como un reloj que hace tic-tac. Quizá esto apoya la idea de que quizá tenemos o apoya precisamente o da más peso a la idea de regular el tiempo de descanso. En una economía del conocimiento y en tiempos de trabajo flexible, esto es tanto más verdad. A nivel científico estamos viendo que el tiempo no es lineal y esto precisamente nos hace perdernos en esta reflexión. En lugar de hablar de una jornada de 8 horas, es mejor proteger el tiempo de descanso. Actualmente, en la normativa de la OIT, precisamente este aspecto no está bien abordado. Y yo creo que hay que proteger el tiempo de descanso. Tiene que ser ese momento en el que uno tiene derecho a desconectar y eso nos ayudaría un poquito a hacer frente a ese fenómeno al que usted aludía.
Thanks for the lecture.
Muchas gracias por esta ponencia, por esta intervención. Yo creo que quizá habría que trabajar sobre la noción de un trabajo orientado hacia los objetivos, hacia la consecución de unos resultados, en lugar de regularlo en términos temporales.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you if you could elaborate.
A ver, si podía ampliar un poquito la noción o la propuesta de esta semana laboral de 4 días. Se ha hablado de ello aquí en este país. Un partido de izquierdas quiere introducirlo en la agenda política. Aparentemente nos parece una buena idea. Tiene sentido reducir el tipo de trabajo, ¿verdad? Pero de luego, cuando te enfrentas a este mercado de trabajo muy polarizado, con empleos precarios, etcétera, pues me temo que esto podría llegar a agravar las desigualdades. Por lo tanto, me gustaría mucho escuchar sus reflexiones en torno a esta cuestión. ¿Puedo hablar en inglés? ¿Puedo hablar en español?
Hello. I'd like to thank your presentation. It's been great, really interesting. I'm from a trade union, workers' trade union, and I think I found lacking a couple of points, perhaps, and it has to do with the first question on the definition of working time. When we negotiate a collective bargaining agreement, we look at all the norms and regulations, and the Article 2 of a European directive which does define working time. It says working time is the time when working people are at their workplace, available to the entrepreneur or employer, carrying out their functions and their activities. That is the definition. Now, this is a concept and that is defined, which the Spanish legislation doesn't exactly define it so far. Now, a question of democracy. How can there be an equitable share out of working time if there's no democracy? And that can only be achieved between collective negotiation between workers and employers who organize working time. And we have to bear in mind the context. Of course, you may know if you know the Spanish context, but 80% of companies with less than 10 workers do not offer flexible working hours. And that is a very, very high percentage that represents a very high percentage of the, if you like, the working employers' fabric in Spain. The small, medium-sized companies with less than 10 workers. I shall also speak in Spanish. Thanks ever so much for your thoughts. You really put on the table a very important question, flexibility and all the paradoxes. Let me put on the table something else, which my colleague has also mentioned, is the percentage of people who cannot work. Deskless workers who do not work at an office, and it's a very high percentage. They have no possibilities of enjoying flexible working, which many other workers who are, if you like, white-collar workers do have. If we look at statistics, looking at life and working conditions in Europe, there are countries where there's an important percentage of people who do have flexibility, and yet there's countries where there's a high percentage of people who do not have or cannot avail themselves of flexible working. That is the case in our country. There's a paradox between workers who can enjoy flexibility and those who cannot. And those who cannot attempt to find ways to achieve that flexibility. So there's a debate which we have to dwell upon. And something else which has emerged during all our discussion, not just today, but yesterday, the day before, the 4-day working week. There was a speaker who said, okay, the 4-day week could increase gender discrimination. And they say, no, let us rather than have a 4-day working week, let's decrease working hours during the day, because care work is done every day, all day, not just on one day. So those who are involved in unremunerated care work do need to have less daily working hours. So there's also a debate on the table, which I do think we should ponder about, and we should listen to all involved stakeholders.
Quick questions.
Oh, okay.
The first one is regarding, you were linking right to disconnect and productivity. If you can develop a bit more on this idea and which data we have to ensure that. And the second is a bit more of reflection. The last days we have been talking about youth, no? Young people are big allies for the right to time. And on these regards, do you have any data showing how young people react to this self-exploitation?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've messed up the mic. Yes. I knew I was going to. Okay.
Sí. Hola, yo también hablaré en castellano.
Hello, I'll also speak in Spanish. I'm looking at a new perspective, not from cities, but from other areas. So when we organize the city in terms of services and urban planning, we are confronted with difficulties. We wish to organize things better, to use time better in our cities, to ensure that citizens can have a better quality of life. There are many difficulties. How do we organize the city around sort of school times and working times? It's not easy. It's complicated. When you're attempting to facilitate this time-work conciliation, there are difficulties there. I was delighted, by the way, by your presentation. It was really interesting. But we often organize the city pursuant to working times. All these timetables that working people have, and they must fulfill that. And all our lives revolves around that, and this planning of a city and the design of a city organized revolves around that. I think that companies do have a big responsibility there, corporations that is, not just with working times, also how we organize that time. Many of them organize work or the ways of working around the availability of a worker. And that it has to be changed. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to move forward.
Thank you very much. Now we have a lot of questions.
Thank you for all these questions. I thought half of you were asleep, but okay, that was not the case. So the gentleman in the Greek, can you just repeat your question? Because I remembered it, but then there are too many questions, so I didn't write it down. Oh, right. Yes, goal. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So let's just go sequentially with the goal. So I think the whole point is, going back to that time and the amorphousness of it, and how I think it's just like the provocation is how ludicrous it is that we're still based on a very industrialized factory-based work schedules or work notions of work and productivity, and that we need to be more goal or target oriented in terms of measuring output, measuring kind of success or performance. Now, the problem is, once you start doing that, it might actually lead to companies misusing it, especially when workers don't have powers, to add more work and say, well, it's just, you could do it whenever you want, but it's just almost impossible to do it within a given amount of time. Even if it's amorphous, we still have 24 hours, 7 days a week. So, it would be good to be goal focused only when we are able to protect workers, protect those boundary times, and protect the right to not only time, but also for collective action as well. In terms of the 4-day week, or maybe I should just kind of actually go in and collect it in different things. So with the I wasn't quite sure it might be kind of missed in translation, or in translation not here, but translation in here. But I think it's, especially with flexible working, there is a problem with the individualization of contracts. So one of the reasons why it leads to exploitations or more exploitation, it's because of this individualization. And this is why a lot of trade unions were against flexible working, because it fractures the work group. But actually, and I didn't have time to talk about this here, but what you find is countries with strong unions, strong collective bargaining, but also where their workers collectively addressing these issues do much better in providing good flexible working practices. And that is because by acting collectively, you are able to protect yourself and time better. So you're much better. If you were to have collective flexible working patterns, you're much more likely to not exploit yourself, use it in a powerful mode. And that is one of the things that I would like to say. So it is definitely something that has to be done in that collective matter, and where unions actually have to be able to even be up the forefront in terms of gathering people's notions of what flexibilities they want, and be able to negotiate with the employers, not as individuals, but as a collective, and providing those rights. So I think, again, I work with the Trade Unions Congress in the UK a lot here, and it's especially those without voices or without power that need a lot of the flexible working. And this actually includes some of the questions that you were saying about how, so Spain is one of the worst countries in terms of flexible working. Now, it cannot be explained only through the types of industries you have here, right? Because if you look at Sweden or Denmark, it's 50% plus workers working flexibly. So why is that? It's not just because you have very, very different industries. Yes, there is a differences in that, but it's not only that, because I don't think there has been a discussion or perhaps worker power enough to really push those in, such as in Germany, where a lot of these debates have been had. Now, all workers cannot work from home, not just yet. I think in the future, you'll probably see a lot more workers being able to work from home, such as retail workers, because everything is now, we buy things online, so we need to do things online. Even factory workers with computer-aided automated systems, you could actually do it online. So for example, a good example of this is the American Air Force now has more drone pilots than fighter jet pilots. So they've moved away from fighter jets to drone pilots who sit in an office or sit in their homes and go fight in, well, mostly the Middle East, unfortunately, but okay, put that set aside. But I think the flexible working also is not necessarily just about teleworking, because there's a whole range of flexible working, flexi time, condensed hours, etc. And it's more about the notion of how can we make collectively or through a cafeteria of options for workers, ensure that work can facilitate a better work-family integration, that it need not be conflictual, because when it starts conflicting, it doesn't lead to good outcomes, neither to the worker or to the company. And kind of related to that, I think I wanted to respond to Marga's question about, and also about the gender discrimination issue. So 4-day week can increase gender discrimination when it's done at the company level. The reason is, if it's done at the individualized company level, what you'll find is that it may be those companies who employ more women who use 4-day week, which, if a woman in a heterosexual relationship, if a woman works 4 days and the man still works in the banking sector where they are expected to work 70 hours a week, who's going to take care of children? Who's going to pick up children? Who's going to do the housework? It's going to be the women. It's going to exacerbate the gender inequality patterns. The same thing that we saw from home working or flexible working. Women, if they take up flexible working in those scenarios where, especially if their male partners cannot, they will end up doing more housework and childcare, and as I said, exacerbated the gender inequality patterns. Having said that, we have to think about this. I'm sorry, I just broke that. Women are in part-time work already. So women are already working 4-day weeks in majority of European countries. They are very productive. They're not being paid for it. They're not getting the promotions. What 4-day week should be able to do is, essentially, women are already working 4 days. We're elevating women's position into a full-time working status. At the same time, we're making men work less. When men work less, then they should be able to, or they would have more time to be able to, or they'll lose the excuse not to do more housework and childcare. And this is why, to be able to get all the men work 4 days or reduce their working hours, at least not adhere to the 70-hour, crazy hour working week, and elevate women's status, this is why we need to do this at a national level, or at least at a regional level, where it's not a certain company or not. Because if you have a company who do it, it's just going to be like, especially women with care responsibility, to go to that company, and then we're going to exacerbate the inequality patterns again and again. So there's a limitation of doing this at the company level. I don't know if we had the productivity issue, a right to disconnect. So Kwon and Tagero is a psychologist who talks about work. So I mean, with all due respects to people in this room, I'm pretty sure even you right now, who are really passionate about working time and right to time, still have this notion in the back of your head, and including my head, that long hours work in the office is productive. That somehow, okay. But it's like, so like, at least like, that to be able to kind of, be more motivated, productive, or be, pursue my passion into terms of social justice and working time, you have to do a little bit more. Actuality is like, if you, again, and this is exactly what the Time Use Initiative is about. Let's look at the science about this. The science is that when you detach mentally and physically away from work, you actually end up being more productive. You have, and I'm not going to try to explain the science behind it, but essentially, when you turn your work computer off in your head, your kind of software or charger or whatever, when you're sleeping, when you are able to take time off, your brain actually, in the background, does a lot of that problem solving that you need to do much better than you looking at the problem all the time. So what that actually does is make you more productive at work. Right? So this right to disconnect isn't, again, only about workers' protection. yes, that, but it's also about managers' protection, because a lot of managers, especially small businesses, may not have the capacity to be really able to introduce these policies. Whereas if you were to introduce it at the European level or the national level, what you're doing is you're encouraging managers to better use their workers and better use human resource in the way that it works best. Oh yeah, and then the city planning issue about flexible. So with flexible working, it completely changes our ideas of city planning, etc. But I think that is ways, or the 4-day week or flexible working can actually really revolutionize the way we use our cities. For example, if we don't all have to go to work at 9 a.m. in the morning, or we don't have to go to work at all. So, you know, one of the great things that happened in the UK, so home working has expanded tremendously in the UK because we had a horrific pandemic. We had one of the worst COVID cases, and I'm here talking to you in Spain. But we are one of the world leaders in terms of COVID deaths. But the silver lining was there's a lot of government mandated home working practices. So we were working from home de facto for 1.5 years, and that was enforced by the state. What happened was people started moving out of big cities. So there were some London, Manchester, these major big cities that were really bad to live in because housing was expensive, was polluted, it was always congested. People started moving out into the cities, into the coastal areas, the nicer and more cheaper areas, because they didn't have to commute into work. They also, a lot of people were able to better do, so school drop-offs have changed because before, people couldn't really drop off their children because, the moving from the to school to like workplace, and it was such a mess, and it was always a stressful issue. That's why we had more, breakfast clubs and afternoon clubs. But that has changed because parents were working from home and able to just walk close to their schools. And essentially, I think and this is also by our Office for National Statistics, is that it makes people use the city differently because you're at home, you're walking much more into the closer areas, not doing that long commute into the work and back, depending on who you are, obviously, and really able to rejuvenate some of those regional areas that were, in the UK case, very deprived and needed the uplift in terms of economics. And the other thing is people were using these, not necessarily public transportation because that was due to COVID, that's a bit different, but footpaths and cycling. Cycling increased a lot. So you could actually really re-envision a society where people don't do 9 to 5, people work, live in more like dispersed area, not necessarily all congested in one area, but also, especially with the 4-day week, my hopes, and there's some empirical evidence maybe we all could share about, people start making better choices. So you'll be able to use public transport, not ride in cars, use public transportation because you have more time, use cycling or walking a bit more, and be able to not always be rushing and hurrying, which makes you use these kind of bad choices, which is, eating bad food like junk food and using cars. So yeah, I kind of wobbled on for a long time. I don't know if there's a question that I missed, and I do apologize.
Excuse me, we're running out of time, but probably later you can share with the participants your reflections. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. Para cerrar esta primera parte introductoria, en primer lugar, queríamos excusar a la representación.
So firstly, we would like to apologise on behalf of the Barcelona City Council because apparently the representative is unwell. And to bring this opening session to a close, we have Joan Subirats with us, Minister of Universities, who will welcome us.
Tots i totes, lamento no haver...
Oh, well, hello, welcome to all of you. I'm afraid I have not been able to be present here during the opening session, but I did wish to be here, even if it's online. It's a subject I have been discussing often with Marta Junqué, and I also wish to welcome Margarita León, who's the director of the UIMP Centre in Barcelona, and the mayor, Ada Colau, my friend Ada Colau, also Professor Chung from the University of Kent. I cannot be with you today as Minister of Universities, but I can highlight the significance and importance of this subject currently, from whatever angle we look at it. And from the academia, we're very concerned about this. The pandemic, as shall be said time and again, it has been a key sort of line of change, and it has made us rethink timetabling, work times, and the concept of working time. And this has come to the forefront. It's very much in the front line now. Technological change has led to significant transformation in the working timetable. The key word, which is essential, it's not just a question of shortening the working week or the working time during the day. What is key is flexibility. We need formulae which allow us to have less hours dedicated to the intensive working days, which go beyond what would be reasonable, and on the contrary, these hours should be the most productive as possible. There should be a lot less possibility of being productive in other areas, such as that family, or your own personal training and lifelong learning, which is so important. And we're also attempting to regulate that and promote that from academia. And everything that has to do with more family logics and looking at care questions, proper nutrition, different forms of consumption. There are many, many different aspects which come to play here, different factors which come to play here, and which are brought to bear by the excessively long working hours. Much has been discussed about this throughout the world, and let me just highlight the commitment from the government and from the Ministry of Universities to ensure that these experiences could be fleshed out and we could move forward decisively in this field. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias al ministro.
Thank you very much, Minister Subirats. And now, to continue, we have a session of a presentation of experiences and lessons learned in an attempt to regulate working time, different experiences, both in Spain and in other cities and other countries in Europe. To that end, I'd like to ask the following people to come up to the rostrum. It'll be a hybrid event with people online as well, but we will have people face to face. I'd like to invite Jean-Yves Boulin, who is with us today, Montserrat Pineda, Ignace Glorieux, and Will Strong. Before starting, I'll give you a brief introduction of the people who are with us in person. Let's see. Jean-Yves Boulin is a sociologist, a specialist in employment, work and time use of time and time regulation, and policies of time, and he is also a researcher in the University of Paris Dauphine. Montserrat Pineda is Secretary of Feminism and Equality in the Department of Equality of the Generalitat de Catalunya, that is the regional government of Catalonia. Ignace Glorieux is President of the International Association for Research in Uses of Time. And Will Strong is Director for Research in the Autonomy Institute in the United Kingdom. Those online, we have Ignacy Boqueras, President of Honor of the Independent Aroer Foundation, from the National Committee for the Rationalization of Spanish Times, Francesca Zakzik, Professor of Time Policies and former assessor, and is a delegate in Milan in questions of mobility, sustainability, and time. And we shall also have, last but not least, we shall hear from Joaquin Perez Rey, who is the Secretary of State for Employment and Work. And I'll come up here. I shall be moderating this session and to comment, to discuss about these experiences. We'll start with a presentation of Ignacio Boqueras, who will connect online. Okay, well, no, later. Let's kick off with Jean-Yves Boulin. He can give us a brief explanation of time, use, and the city, pursuant to the second Aubry law, lessons learned in this sense. There are 5 minutes for each speaker, right? So you give a very brief, succinct explanation on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And actually, I should say that it was a kind of paradox. You're asking of the role of this law, Aubry law. I will try to explain the context. Actually, since the 90s, the middle of the 90s, there has been a European program. The name is EUREXTER, which is an acronym for European Territorial Excellence. And this network has undertook to disseminate the time of the cities, Tempi della Città methods in Italy, which were born in Italy. And it is interesting to note that this program was financed, the European program was financed by the European Social Fund and was supported by the Public Services Employers Organization, the CEEP, and the ETUC, which is the European Trade Union Congress. I think it's very important to have that in mind because it's something coming from and the purpose of this program was to develop the local social dialogue. How to develop, how to have a social dialogue at the local level. And there has been a meeting on working time in the European Institute of Florence in 1995. And we met. There has been a meeting between the leaders of this program, the men we were monitoring this program, and 3 researchers of different nationalities and disciplines. I mean, Sandra Bonfiglioli, which was a urban planner in the Politecnico of Milano, director of the urban planning department of the Politecnico of Milano. Ulrich Mückenberger was a law, you know him, he has been made a contribution on Monday. He's a lawyer on social labor questions, and myself, a sociologist. And the question was, okay, the local social dialogue, but what are the main objectives of social local dialogue? And we decided that time should be a key element for the social dialogue. And in the case of France, to come back to the case of France, several French local authorities were made aware of time policies following the example of Italy under the impetus of the EUREXTER program, the EUREXTER network. And there has been a French branch of this network, the French Social School of Territorial Excellence, which has initiated training courses integrating time issues in several territories and organized several study visits in Italy. And several of these territories have taken part in seminars and summer school organized by Eurostar network between 1996 and 2000. And a powerful stimulus for reflection of France came from the process of implementing the 35 hours a week, which has begun in 1997, actually. And there has been a question it was a question for local authorities on the future uses of time, the future impacts of the new links between working time and other social times on mobility, on the uses of social and cultural infrastructures, of services infrastructure. And time schedules and opening hours were going to be shaken up by the implementation of the 35 hours a week. And all this reflection arose in the context of the discussion of the second law Aubry. I remind you that to implement the 35 hours a week, there has been two laws. One law, first law in 2007, in 97, and a second law in 2000. And during this time, we have begun to discuss and to publish articles, books on local time policies. And Martin Aubry, who was a Minister of Labor, has prefaced a book, La Ville à 1000 temps, time with thousands times, written by Ulrich Meckenberger and myself. And she and her teams were made aware of the externalities that would be generated by the 35 hours a week. This is why, at the last moment, this paragraph was added in the law, in the first article of the law. And you can read this paragraph, but for the Spanish, Catalan language, I can read it. In urban areas with more than 50,000 inhabitants, the chairman of the intermunicipal structure, in liaison where appropriate with the mayors of neighboring municipalities, promotes the harmonization of public services timetables with the needs arising in particular for the point of view of the reconciliation of professional life and family life, the evolution of the organization of work in the activities established on the territory of the municipality or nearby. To this end, it brings together as needed the representatives of the organization of local authorities managing the services concerns and puts them, where appropriate, in contact with the social partners, very important, of companies and local authorities in order to promote knowledge of the needs and facilitate the search for local adaptation capable of satisfying them. I think it's very important to have this. But frankly speaking, this paragraph is quite ignored by the official, because this law concerns working time, a matter which does not fall within the scope of the competence of local authorities. But this law brought a form of legitimacy to. Excuse me?
Just 1 minute, Chief.
Okay.
Yeah,
this law brought a form of legitimacy to time policies. And this legitimacy was reinforced by the Datar seminar, which was, the Datar is a delegation to the urban planning, and an institution, governmental institution in charge of territorial planning, which was attached to the Prime Minister. And this institution launched a call for projects entitled Territories 2020, which included one on time and territories, which content derived from several papers we have written on time policies. And the network of training, reflection, and exchange of experience aggregated around the French School of Territorial Excellence and my institute in Paris Dauphine has monitored this seminar during 3 years. And in addition, the State Secretary for the City, as well as the one dedicated to women's rights, were involved in the process of reflection by jointly organizing the seminar and the parliamentary report. And to conclude, I should say that there has been a strong support to time policies at the beginning of the 2000s in the course of the law on the 35 hours a week. But this, unfortunately, has stopped in 2002 when the support of government has stopped in the 2002 when there has been a change of government. But this is another story.
Thank you very much. Ahora nos acompañará en formato online Ignacio Buqueras.
Now we shall have Ignacio Buqueras, who will tell us online, will tell us about what's been done in Spain to approve a time use act or time use policy and lessons learned during this whole process. So hopefully we'll have him online. He's Ignacio Buqueras.
Segundo, estamos. Podéis ir pensando las preguntas.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Okay, I see that we are online. Yes, sir, you have 5 minutes to discuss the attempts to promote time use policies in Spain. Next year, we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of the National Committee to Rationalize Spanish Working Hours. From the very first moment, we were in touch with the Spanish Parliament and the Senate, with the main unions and the Public Administration Ministry and all the institutions that are stakeholders in this very important matter. From the very beginning, we wanted Spain to have similar hours as the rest of Europe, more humane, more rational working hours to allow for work-life balance and to improve productivity, because we are still in a country that is not up to speed regarding the long working hours with low efficiency, and in current times with skyrocketing energy costs. Well, we are talking about additional costs of AC, heating in offices and workspaces. And one of the first meetings we had was at the Spanish Parliament on February the 27th, 2006, together with the National Committee members and Mario Marin, who was the chairman of the Spanish Parliament, and the spokespeople of different political parties, the Socialist Party. We had Ana Torné from the Popular Party, and then Sánchez Lliure from Convergència i Unió, Margarita Uría by the National Basque Party. They all attended the meeting, and we spotted the need to set up a task force at the Spanish Parliament to coordinate the work on this matter, the rationalization of working hours. The year after, we held a plenary session at the Spanish Parliament, and several authorities attended from the Socialist Party, the Popular Party, and there was the intent to make headway. Nevertheless, this whole process got stuck because there were some formal defects in the process, and the only one back at the time that got angry was Jordi Sevilla, the Public Works Ministry. He supported the proposals of the National Commission to rationalize working hours, and he tried to mediate so that we could achieve something. And these all resulted in a breakfast at the Hotel Reach, and he said publicly that he had lacked the support of several ministries. And we published a white paper on working hours saying that Spain should have European working hours. This was said in the prologue of the white paper. And in his ministry, the Public Administration Ministry, we launched the white paper that was widely covered by the media. We organized 84 plenary sessions in different institutions. The first ones with the two main unions in Spain, and Cándido Méndez, Comisiones Obreras Secretary General, and the other Secretary General welcomed the approach, and the same was done with employers, associations. So it was a bit of paying lip service, because 20 years have gone by and Spain doesn't have rational working hours yet that would allow us to have a better co-responsibility and work-life balance. We are European leaders in low birth rates, and that has a lot to do with the working hours that we have in our country. They don't help, and public television doesn't help either, because our prime time on TV goes up to 1 a.m. and well, these was changed for some time, and prime time was moved down to 11 or 11:15, 11:30 p.m., which is much more rational. So it's the pending task that we have in our democracy, because without the shade of a doubt, this goes in the right direction to improve people's behavior. And there are many political leaders that do not refuse a more humane, rational and European working hours, but then they do nothing, and they are actually reluctant to the actual implementation of those working hours. We need to put an end to these irrational working hours, and I think that this session that you are having today is very powerful, and we need to progress, and I'm calling upon the politicians, the decision makers, the union leaders, but also the civil society, because this has an impact on our daily life. We must change it. We need rational working hours. Otherwise, we're not fully European, and we see a negative impact on our social and family lives. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a Ignacio Buqueras por esta.
Thank you very much to Ignacio Buqueras, talking about future challenges to keep working on the regulation of time uses. Okay, so we have another online attendant, Francesca Zajic.
Trying to share my PowerPoint if
Sí, mientras se conecta, introduzco brevemente a.
Let me introduce Francesca, Professor Francesca.
Sí.
Just one minute. I don't know how.
I think we have.
Okay. I want to talk about very briefly about the principle that go on time in Italy. It's important to remember that women were the protagonist of the third experiment in time policies, and it was in the 90s, especially at the end of the 1980s, sorry, especially at the end of 80. Women that were women with a dual presence. That means they work in family and in public work, proposed a law called Women Change Times. But unfortunately, it failed. The first important starting point for urban time policies was one article of the main reform text of public local administration, local law number 142 in the 1990. In this period, and for this law, many cities, Milan, Genoa, Roma, Catania, Bolzano, Venice, among others, began to apply time policies and set up the time offices. Since the 8th March of 2000, urban time policies have been governed by a national law on family care and parental leave. The law, called Turco Law from its proposer, Livia Turco, is the number 53. This act makes the definition and implementation of a territorial timetable plan compulsory, and this is very important, for municipalities with more than 30,000 inhabitants. And after this date, many regions approved legislation on urban times, and the regions gave money to the municipalities for many projects. But we can go more in the general content of this law is to promote a new balance between work, care, training, and relationships. Was composed by two parts. The first, parental leave, regarded for balancing inside the workplace, and the second part on times policies regard for balances in the daily life. I don't know why I can't go on with the okay. Going more in detail of the law, we can say that the first part promotes the harmonization of timetables throughout the region and the municipalities in order to support equal opportunities between men and women and to promote the quality of life through the balancing of working times, relationships, parental care, training, and time for oneself with people who live in the city or use it even temporarily. The second part, very important, promotes the coordination and administration of the times and schedules of the city and the adoption by the municipalities of the territorial timetable plans. We can say there were 7 main action sectors in the law. Public accessibility to services, and in the you can read some of the cities who works on this topic. Was public spaces integrated design, then time banks in many towns and quarters, agreement or pact on mobility, very important nowadays, after pandemic, shop opening policies, school times, and lastly, cultural and tourist promotion of the city. On these premises, a very high number of cities defined territorial plans of timetables. Many of them experimented individual projects with money given to them by the regions. But I wanted to finish to present in very briefly the case study of Milan, because I think is for Italy is absolutely the more important. The first time plan in Milan was written at the beginning of 1990. After this period, after this moment, for about 20 years, the urban time policies were forgotten, and this happened under right-wing administration. With the left administration, so these differences is important to underline. With the left administration on 2011, the PISA-P administration, the Times office of the city was revitalized and many individual projects activated. But a big change happened with the pandemic. Under the direction of the prefect, that is a national official, a new territorial timetable plan bore with the main public and private stakeholders for the drafting of a new timetable and a new slogan, hold on, Milan changes the rhythms, Milan changes the skin. It was a draft, really very important, because it was supposed to adopt a new idea of the space, of the times, of the daily life. And 3 big goals were: 1, dilution of the demand for private and public mobility with an impulse towards slow mobility, cycling and walkability. 2, flexibility and desynchronization of working hours with the smart working, but also of the beginning and the end of public service activities, especially schools, commercial places, cultural and recreational activities. That means the hours to enter and to finish the work in many services change. Proximity, the last goal was the idea of the city 15 minutes. That means the proximity of services. Well, that's all, because I had really a few minutes. I want to say it's very difficult to go on and to build a real timetable, plans. It happened in Bolzano now, also in Bergamo, in Pesaro, especially in some medium-sized habitat cities, where it's easier to understand, to analyze what the people want, how is organized the daily life of the people, and especially women. I must remember, and I conclude, that time policies, urban time policies in Italy and still now, women are the protagonists of this change. And this means it's important for everybody. If one law or one experiment is important for women, this means that involves all the city, men, women, of course, but also men, child, elderly, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Después de conocer
Okay, so now we have the knowledge about a pioneering experience, such as the Turco law in Italy, and she showed how relevant cross-cutting policies are when it comes to promoting such initiatives. And moving on with this experience panel, we have with us Montserrat Pineda, Feminism's secretary at the Equality and Feminism's Department of the Catalan government. And she will tell us about another pioneering experience, such as the time use reform in Catalonia and their approach to time use policies in Catalonia. You have 5 minutes.
Cronòmetre per un cas. Bueno, en primer lloc,
First and foremost, I'd like to thank the chance I have to be able to share with you this initiative of our regional government. And I say we have taken up all the experience from many years now from the different administrations and leadership. There's also the chance to be able to explain, if you like, the imprint which we, as the Catalan government, wish to put on this. Our regional minister on Monday was talking about why the time policies and how we're also trying to ensure that we have a gender perspective. And let's see. There are 4 key elements which I have to give in the 5 minutes I have. I had bargained for a longer time, but I'll have to try and condense it, I have to say, in the 4 minutes remaining to me. Let me say that we have a long trajectory in Catalonia, as I have said, like breathing life into these policies. When we set up a committee on time and equality within our administration, it's a body we have for if you like, to find consensus. And back in 2007 we started. It is also important to know that we set up the Directorate General for Equality in the Department of Employment, because this marks the logical line of working from the government. And furthermore, the very fact that historical moment which they will have a left-wing coalition, and we wish to highlight the importance of these policies. Of course, there have been ups and downs. citizens' initiatives in 2013. In 2015, there was an advisory council for changing timetables. In 2007, there was a pact for timetabling change. The government also set up a plan to that end. In 2020, with the pandemic came along and forced us to rethink everything and what the policies we need to move forward. And for us, this strategy is very, very important. Not just to ensure our participation, but also to ensure that we can move forward doing what we are doing now. Marta was saying, it is important that this panel is firmly, this panel and this organization is firmly convinced of the need for this, and the fact that public administrations are convinced of this is borne out. So, as the regional minister said, who talked about the need for the transformation and why it is being led with a new structure, with a new government department of equality and feminism. This transformation has a feminist bias, but it's also class-based. It has to do with which is intertwined with the green initiative of the regional government. We're not talking of transformations which are parallel. No, they're not in sort of silos. They must be intertwined and linked together. The policies have to take on board the gender perspective, but the class perspective. When we're talking of poverty, that also means that to palliate poverty, you need to, if you like, affect privileges. But what is important, and I think it is irrelevant, is the democratic transformation we need. Because the regional minister was saying, and I'd say we say it again, the possibility for participation is essential, and we cannot understand this revolution which is pending, which is necessary. I'm not just talking of the right to time use. I'm talking of a revolution. So this political participation does need its own tempos, its own time, if you like. And that's why there's a leadership from our department. And that's why we wish to set up a new director general responsible for care and time use. So there must be ideally there should be a single leadership of a cross-cutting nature, and we had to do that to ensure there was a structure for equality. I'm spending a lot of time to this part because it is essential to talk of time policy, but we can't to talk of the consequences of our policies, but we must talk of how we wish to implement that. That is essential. That is why we have attempted to explain how we understood policies, the leadership we are carrying out together with the Department of Employment and Corporations, or the work we shall carry out with other departments looking at indicators. I don't have time to dwell and get into detail, but I have to do with co-leadership, this seeking out new frameworks. And what we're doing in the public administration, we attempt to incorporate not just a family work conciliation. We're not talking of workers as represented by trade unions and companies or the administration as an agent You have 1 minute. Time is a very important value, but in any case, what for me is highly relevant is this logic, which we deal with a public, with civil servants, to ensure that there is equality. Because if we look at the policy for transformation, it is essential to ensure that equality plans, not just within the business world, but within the civil service, should change the organizational structure. I'm not talking of the specific measures rationalizing a working time, but the whole organization has to take a long, hard look at itself and has to ensure that the right to time is embedded in the work organization. It is obvious that there are many challenges ahead. We are fully aware that these challenges have to do with how we confront poverty, disequality, and discrimination. And this can only be done via policies to improve the economy. And this has to do with care and has to do with how we can move forward in terms of timetable at schools as well. Because, and often we don't assume that the changing school timetables are not part and parcel of the time use. But that is absolutely the case. And we do believe that when we're talking of policies, we're not just talking of a rationalization or flexibility, but taking a completely new concept at a global level. That's all. Thank you.
Después de conocer 3 experiencias que han sido pioneras y que sin duda nos...
Well, after having listened to 3 experiences which allow us to share out this reflection this week, now we shall find out what is going on. What are the current perspectives to move forward? The first intervention in that sense will be from Joaquín Pérez Rey, who is the Secretary of State for Employment and Economy. He is connected right now, and he shall explain us what is happening concerning the organization of time and the labor market in the case of our country of Spain, and the perspectives to breathe life into new initiatives. Joaquin, you have 5 minutes. Well, fine. Thanks ever so much. Welcome. I do regret not being able to be with you there in Barcelona today. It's a very interesting initiative. It's a very enriching debate, given the level of discussions is very high. It's a great pity, but hopefully there'll be another occasion, another edition. I would like to look at this decisive event. It's one of the most important policies that the country can face in terms of time use. Talking of working time. Working time tends to have to be fairly central in people's lives. Often we only work of working time, but we also lose sight of the other at this working time coordinate and conditions the rest of people's lives. So when you are working, you cannot dedicate time to your family or enjoy leisure. You're not using public transport. You're working. And so it conditions the rest of our lives. So when it comes to, in our discussions, the discussion on time, working time, as I said, has conditioned everything else. And often we talk of all the when you're not working, so there's non-working time, a negative definition, which is kind of bears out one's mental bias in a sense, right? As if it's not as important. So this protagonism of working time is a first element we shall have to look at and bear in mind. And the rest of the time, if you like, looking at leisure, family time, should have more protagonism. They should not just be seen as what is left over after dedicating an important part of our lives to work. The problem of the working day and working times is construction from quantity and not quality. Those are two more variables we should think about, right? Because it is very obvious that quantity is key. We cannot lose sight. The workers' movement has been defined from its inception to defend a reduction of working time. But perhaps we should look at more qualitative, if you like, inputs, rather than just quantitative, reducing working time. Going beyond the definition of what should be maximum working hours as negotiated in collective agreements, but there are other matters. Well, in Spain, there's a lot of overtime. Many people work overtime, so the reference to the maximum working time is false, because more than 5% of salaried workers carry out overtime normally. There are more than 6.5 million hours of overtime during the year, and often it is not. And often unions say, no, we don't want just more money, we want other solutions. So in Spain, we have very long working days, or working days which are long but are not fully declared as such. There are a series of legislative changes in the pipeline, and I'll talk about them in a minute. We should ensure that standards and norms are respected rigidly. The Working Inspectorate at the end of September has said warnings to enterprises where we feel there are working hours way above those that have been declared. One of the initiatives of our ministry has been to set up an algorithm which will attempt to help detect in which companies there are people working way beyond what is officially declared. And we are attempting to facilitate the work of labor inspectors, employment inspectors, who have to check out the veracity of time decline. And then part-time working. We have seen part-time working as one way of linking up family life with work time, but unfortunately, very often part-time work does lead to situations of precarious. Many of these elements are being checked out closely by the Ministry of Employment and Social Security. And there have been a series of legal reforms on the ministry, particularly the labor law reform, which has been a big and ambitious initiative. And we also have to introduce the Spanish legislation, transparent working conditions conventions, and other European and international legislation, and we must center on that. The possibility for life-work balance, which do not mean that people who are responsible for care having to abandon their professional careers. No, we do need systems to ensure that doesn't happen. It's not just a question of quantitative aspects, qualitative aspects. We're looking at the key moments, ensuring that people have leisure time adapted to the specific need, moving away from the formula of current definitions of to legal. There's certain unilaterality of companies when it involves looking at working times, and they are only concerned, let's face it, by their needs, but we also must take account of the needs and necessities of workers, and ensure that their working time has flexibility and is not strictly linked to given hours. So we do need transparent conditions. They are essential, and we should. We hope and trust that we'll be able to adapt Spanish legislation to increase and make more flexible the distribution of working time to meet people's needs. But I think we have in the pipeline more ambitious projects, and the organizers of this Congress are key, are essential. And as you well know, the Ministry of Employment has been advised by the Time Use Week initiative. We have listened to you and to your experience to be able to inform our legislative initiatives. It is a social landmark. The use of time is one of the commitments of the coalition government, and it is a commitment which has been taken on board by the Deputy Prime Minister, who is also the Minister of Employment, and we need to adapt adapt working times to the rhythms of cities, of citizens, of care. And I would say that is our if you like, our plans, our aspirations, and our legislative track, if you like. We should take up this idea that all time, and move away from this idea that all time that is important, it's working time, and the rest are just sort of odds and ends you can do to do things outside work. We must move with the centrality of time as working time, and the rest is not that important. So we do need to bear in mind other activities, care, leisure, and other matters. And this can only be done from a wide-ranging perspective. Law of time uses, and let me refer to what the Minister of Universities, Juan Subirats, said. It will be an act, a law, to allow for a better quality of life, basically. I think we have for many years, we have lived chained to our desks, chained to the workplace, and this has not only proved useless to increase the productivity of our companies or their competitiveness, or to improve their innovation, but it leads to suffering, to illnesses which stem from working practices or disorders. When we realize that many citizens take decisions such as having kids or not, or living in one place or another exclusively, bearing in mind their needs, their working needs, or their employment, that cannot continue. And vital life decisions have to be decoupled from strict inflexible working needs. That will guarantee citizenship which is in full control of its autonomy, and to that end we need to look at both working time, working days from a novel perspective, far more reasonable and far more based on citizenships, and which leads to living together better, to a better family work balance, life work balance, and which is based on looking at the needs for modern times and decisions always conditioned, not just conditioned by our desks and our work, and not so much the need to live a full life. And that would be all really from me. And let me reiterate my gratitude to all the work carried out by your initiative, and we will pay close attention to the conclusions, and my best wishes for this initiative. Thank you.
Joaquin?
Thank you very much, Joaquin. We have with us Ignace Glorieux, President of the International Association for Time Use Research.
I have a presentation, so... Oh yeah, it's over
Thank
there.
you. We have also 5 minutes for
Okay,
your presentation.
I hope to...
Thank you.
Very quick. Well, let me start by saying that if social scientists from the 60s or journalists from the 60s would be very surprised to hear the discussions we have here today, because in fact the society is very different than the one they predict. What they predicted was an area with too much leisure. There was really a moral panic in the 60s. These are some of the titles of Life magazine, 1964. The emptiness of too much leisure, automation and shrinking working week brings a real threat to all of us. So they really feared that people would have nothing to do and would be really, the emptiness of too much leisure. In fact, much earlier already, Keynes predicted that, and he said, well, there's no society. We should be very careful. We should be prepared to the age of leisure and abundance. So we should fear that. And today we are just, the idea, of course, was productivity is going up. And here you see the figures for the European countries. I will not go into that, but in 70 years, it increased with a factor 7 to 6. So the idea was much more productivity. Well, working hours were going down. And in fact, that's what's happening. Here you see the figures from the last 150 years. It decreased with 50%. So if you look, these are Belgian figures from 1956 to 2012. Well, it decreased from 2,000 hours a year to less than 1,500. So in the 50s, we had a 6-day work week, longer working hours during the day, much less holidays. So if we look, I have here a time use survey from the 50s in Flanders among working time men, laborers and employees. If you look at their work week, including commuting, well, married laborers worked 50 hours and a half, including commuting. Employees were privileged, they only worked 54 hours. If we compare it with the last time use surveys we did in Flanders, and we compare cohabiting full-time employed men of about the same age, well, they work about 17 hours to 12 and a half hours less. So it's a little bit surprising that we are discussing long working hours today. But of course, other things happened in the last 50 years. And one of the main things that changed, of course, was the participation of women in the labor market. If you look, these are figures for Belgium again. Well, in 53, 30%, the activity rate among women in Belgium was 30%. And it was mainly young women, 14, 16, 20, 25 years, mothers stopped working. Well, most married women stopped working for the rest of their life. If you look at the activity rate in 21, well, 71% of the women are employed. So we should put that in the picture, and if we compare working hours of the 50s to the ones today, we should bring women in because, well, we changed from a breadwinner's family to a double earning family. So if we look again at the time use survey of 2013 and we bring cohabiting women in from the same age group, so we see that young families today in Flanders bring in 70 hours a week in the labor market, which is more than the 50s, which is just the opposite of what was predicted. We are more active in the labor market as a family, and what is what I would point to here too is that in these young families, let's say, well, still men have a full-time job and women 30 hours. Well, I don't know if I have the time just to briefly show, well, these are women and men and women from 80 to 75 years old, where you can clearly see the division of work. I will not go to the details, maybe later in discussion, but unpaid work among men, well, if you look at the total workload, it's more or less the same, but the division of work is still very traditionally. I will leave this one, and here we see what was already discussed by you. Well, in fact, we see that part-time work among men is very, very, very small, and it's mainly older men who are at the end of their career and not to combine it with household work and childcare. Well, we are going to 50% of the women labor force working part-time. So just as you pointed to the figure that is there. So the demand for a shorter work week is reasonable. If you look at it this way, 30 work-hour week would be reasonable. We would still provide more working time than in the 50s to a couple with two people working 30 hours would still be 60 hours a week, which is more than in the 50. And so it maybe should be also improve the traditional division of work inside the family, although I'm less optimistic than you are. We did a time use study and during COVID when the couple was at home and still the division of work and childcare was still very traditional. Also, the leisure time was not equal at that time. So I'm less optimistic about that in the short term. Maybe in the long run, it would. I could say something about the 30 hours a week experiment that a feminist organization did in Belgium, but maybe I should leave that for the discussion if we can come back to that. Otherwise, I probably will be too long. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right on time. Y ahora para...
And to wrap up, we have our last panelist.
Director of Research at Autonomy. Is going to explain the report about working hours elaborated by Autonomy. Thank you very much, Will.
Sure, thank you. They're working?
No, no.
No. Yes?
Yes, no.
No, they're two shaking heads. You can't really hear. No.
Yes, I think.
Well, we can hear each other, yes, but they...
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Up. There you go.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. Thanks for organizing it. Thanks, Hee-Jung, for the keynote. Thanks particularly for the last presentation. That was very interesting. I'll try and speak slowly for the translators. I'm a very fast speaker. So I come from Autonomy. We're a research institute or a think tank based in London, although we have employees also across the globe. We're a not-for-profit, and we have various research streams. We work on the future of care work, aging populations, technology, basic income, but the flagship policy area is the 4-day week or shorter working weeks. We prefer to talk about shorter working weeks. Reductions in working time can be taken in various ways. I would say, and I'm proud to say that I think we're one of the organizations that has put out some of the more research on this than others to some extent. We've put out about 16 different reports over the last 3 years. The environmental case for a shorter working week, the gender equality case for a shorter working week, the right to disconnect, all sorts. All of the research is available on our website. Please go have a look if you're interested. I thought I might talk about some of the initiatives that we've been involved in, which can teach us different things about working time and working time reduction. One of our first projects was with the Valencian government on the east coast of Spain, helping design their strategy for the future of work. So the document's available online in Spanish, Valencian, and in English. And that was really how to, as a municipality, how as a region we can move to shorter working hours. And there's a particular scheme there, which I'm happy to say is now being rolled out in the region. They've recruited a number of companies for a certain set of pilots. And I'm going to follow that with interest, as well as the Spanish trial at a national level, which I believe there was some communication between the two. We also work with trade unions, and I think the point earlier is very, very important that ultimately, if you look at the history of working time reduction and look at the initiatives that are really powerful today, they have to be involving trade unions in some sense. In Scotland, where the conversation around working time is the most developed in the UK, there is a trade union called the PCS Scotland Trade Union. They work in the civil service, in the public sector, and they're campaigning for a 30-hour working week across the civil service, Scottish Government, Marine, Forestry, all sorts of different departments. That conversation is really picking up, and we did some work with them on talking to workers, focus groups, polling, interviews, workshops around the benefits. And it's a female-dominated workforce. They expressed a lot of concerns around exhaustion, burnouts. A lot of them have caring responsibilities, and they thought a shorter working week would really help them in that area. So that's a particular example to keep an eye on. We also published the results of the Iceland study, which some of you may have read from last year. The public sector in Iceland, over a 5-year period, ran a pilot of a reduction of working hours, about 5 hours. It was a huge success. It was led by trade unions in the public sector. It showed that actually the public sector is perhaps not the hardest and most difficult and out of reach area to try and do working time reduction. In fact, we believe through some of our research and also this Iceland case study that actually the public sector could lead on this. As an employer, the government, the state could shift a huge chunk of the labor market to shorter working hours and set new standards across the private sector as well. So I think it could be a market shaper as well as just a kind of good example of good employment. So the Iceland, Scotland, and Valencia examples, I think, are really kind of the leading examples in this. And I think it's an important point that different sectors speak to different needs. And I think actually the strategy for different sectors obviously has to be different. Care, education, other elements of the health, like health, for example. Those sectors, you simply can't reduce the working week and increase productivity because that's not how those kinds of work. So in those cases, you will need to increase employment in general. That's not necessarily a bad thing. There are other sectors where you can actually have working time reductions, as we've seen, and they can lead the way in some sense, give good examples. But that's not the whole labor market. We know that. I don't think that we should argue against or kind of devalue working time reduction just because some sectors are harder than others. That means that we need to work harder, I think, in order to make sure that we bring all sectors with us. Men, women, all different kinds of work as well. So I think that's something that we need to recognize, and I'm happy that governments around Europe are starting to think about this seriously, and that will take some serious thought. Okay, I'll end with what we're doing in the UK. So as well as producing research, we also have a consultancy. So we help firms. It started because firms were coming to us and saying, how do we run 4-day weeks in our organization? And so we help firms do that. We run pilots of 6 months, 4-day weeks, shorter working weeks. It depends. Sometimes it's shorter days, sometimes it's shorter weeks. And we're co-running with other organizations and universities. We're co-running the world's largest private sector trial, 70 companies, roughly 70. 6 months, we're about halfway through. Very positive results so far. Those results will be published in January, February, so we'll get some really robust results. We're asking questions around household work, around the distribution of tasks in the home. We're asking questions around what do they do with their spare time, these employees, and so on. There's about 2,000 employees, I believe. And we're going to be running more trials like this. And I want to make it clear that pilots by themselves don't change the world, but they are very useful to show examples and give a precedent and show how people are doing this. When I started 5 years ago, we'd point to some care home in Sweden where they had done shorter working weeks. That was pretty much the only example there was. Now there are many, many examples. And in our trial, we have hospitality, we have a fish and chip shop, we have a care home, we have manufacturing, we have all sorts of industries. So I think it's important to build the case. Okay, I think I'll finish. I would like to say the UK campaign, which is not Autonomy. Autonomy is a research and policy organization, but the campaign is very strong at the moment. I would recommend looking them up. The conversation in the UK is very strong right now. Like culturally, it's I was in a restaurant the other day and someone was talking about the trial, for example. So it shows the value of campaigning and working with trade unions. The trade union conversation needs to improve a lot more in terms of we're working with them. We need to make sure that that becomes a real concentration point for campaigns. And finally, I'd like to say there's lots of people in the room who unfortunately I can't meet because I have to leave. But I would like to, we as an organization work with all sorts of organizations, trade unions, campaign groups, and so on. And we'd love to work with people who are in this space. We have a lot of economic quant capacity, a lot of research capacity, and we'd love to work with you to help push this conversation in Spain and elsewhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Will.
Thanks ever so much.
Un breve espacio para preguntas. Os pediría ser muy rápidos y concisos en la elaboración de las preguntas y comentarios que podáis tener para las personas. Tenemos una primera aquí y luego Sensi también tiene una pregunta.
Okay, I will try to be first. This is a question. I think it would be for you, Will. You mentioned the future of work, and it's been discussed all this morning about working time and work time reduction. But I'm just wondering if are we questioning the type of works we do, like it's just sounding that it's just for the sake of working still, but not really just getting things done, and not like if these things are useful for living in general. This would be my question. Like,
Thank you.
If in the future of work, in your proposal, it's considered the type of jobs or works that are being done, and not only the quantity of hours. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Recogeremos un par de preguntas más.
We'll take up other questions, a bunch of questions. Let's see.
It's for Ignace Glorio, but maybe other speakers. Why do you think the 4-day week is a more successful idea in comparison with the 30-hour labor week that you have mentioned? And because this has more positive impact, I think, a 30-day week in our daily life, and to combine this work-life balance. But it seems that in the agenda has more power the other idea. Thank you.
Sí, tenemos otra pregunta aquí en la segunda fila. Sí. Y en la primera también.
Yo dos preguntas, una general.
I have two questions. One more overall and then another specific one. The first one, you have talked of reduction of working time, working less hours, but we haven't talked of salaries or wages. From today's business perspective, if we said, okay, we could cut back timetables and cut back wages. If you're cutting back working time, cut back wages. So what has your experience of companies been in that sense? Have you been capable of cutting back working hours, and have you maintained wages and purchasing power in that sense? This has to be on the table. And then a more general question, because I've had the sensation listening to all of you, and that like hanging over the debate, the idea that organization of time was more feminine, if you like, had a more gender perspective. Now, maybe we are talking of improving the use of time and improving the working time, and to overcome an issue which we women have, and not a problem which is absolutely social and has to do as more general, more across the board, because it's happening in some algorithms that the data on which they're based are discriminatory and are gender biased. When it comes to research, there are issues which concern me in particular. And the other matter is when we talk of time policies, time use policies, and in particular what Montse was saying, it does involve economic investment. We cannot carry out significant change unless there is a, if you like, a financial note accompanying them, because otherwise it'll all be sort of pie in the sky and nothing will actually be done.
¿Hay otra pregunta aquí en la primera fila? ¿No?
Question, I think, in the first row, was there not? Well, I think there's a question which has come from the web, from Montserrat Pineda. Could you tell us measures in the labour market in Catalonia to ensure a proper, sound sort of working time results?
Sí, una pregunta también para Montserrat Pineda.
Another question for Montserrat Pineda. What indicator are you using for mental health matters? How are we seeing, if like, labour absenteeism related to mental health, which has to do with working times?
I can hear it all. Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now, just about? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I think the first question actually is a very good one that we don't ask often enough, basically. I mean, it's dependent on existing and future conditions, right? And that will mean, for example, across the board, we have aging populations. There'll be a lot more caring roles. We know that for sure. But it's not good enough, I don't think, to say we need a caring economy. We do need a caring economy, but the truth is that most care work is really badly paid and it's precarious and so on. So we need caring, there will need to be caring jobs that need to be well remunerated, and the work of it needs to be distributed, whether it's informal care or paid care. There's going to be a lot of it. So I think we need to be aware of that conversation, that we don't just say care work is good work. Well, actually, the conditions aren't actually that good right now. We need to really raise them. And also low carbon work, basically. We need to have, I think it's important to evaluate jobs not because they're jobs, any job's a good job, but really the function of the job, the purpose, the conditions, and the experience of workers, basically. So I don't think we should necessarily prescribe what kinds of roles, apart from we need to be sustainable and obviously probably need to care for people because we have a huge aging population emerging. But also, it's important that actually there's a lot of autonomy, small a, in determining the kind of work that we do, and at the moment we don't have that. So I would say not to prescribe anything, but ultimately sustainable and sustainable care work. Finally, the other question was on wages. Yes, I think it's for us. A shorter working week is 32 hours or less. Obviously, shorter can be slightly more, but for us, a 4-day week, for example, is 32 hours spread in various ways, flexibly. It could be 5 days, short days, blah blah. But wages have to stay the same as they were. So it's not about compressing the same amount of hours, and it's not about cutting wages. That's the only definition. Otherwise, we're just talking about part-time work. And so I think it's incredibly important. And there's two ways that firms that we work with have done have made shorter working weeks work for part-time workers. Either they reduce the working time by the same percentage as full-time workers, so like a 20% reduction of their time, or they raise wages raise wages proportionally. So as Hee-Jing was saying before, many women, for example, go down to part-time work because they have caring responsibilities, but employers should ask themselves, is their output really less when actually all you're doing is cutting their wages? So in many cases, firms we work with have raised wages to make sure that they are still benefiting from the shorter working week, even if they're working 3 days or 2 days. And at Autonomy, for example, every part-time, we work 4 days a week, but every part-time worker gets 25% extra each week because to make sure they benefit from the 4-day week policy, basically. And finally, 4-day week is probably more popular because it's a good slogan. Shorter working weeks are a bit of a mouthful. So when this 4-day week campaign, boom, 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 I genuinely think it's a better campaign slogan, but unfortunately it does get us, every time I talk, we always have conversations about maybe we shouldn't be so rigid about 4-day weeks. And it's absolutely true, we shouldn't be so rigid, but it's just a good slogan that campaigns have picked up.
Thank you very much, Will.
I think I actually have to run. So thanks everyone, good to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your intervention. Ignace, you have a question from Lisa, I think. Yeah.
This question, it was on one of my slides, so it gives me the opportunity to tell something about the experiment we studied in Belgium. There was a group, a women's organization, working about 60 women and 1 man. So, and they decided to go over to a 30-hour week for a full year, fully paid. So in 2019, they went to a 30-hour week. We studied them in 2018. We did a time use study in March and October. Also did interviews, focus groups, studied them during the experiment, 2019, in March and October again, and then afterwards, but then unfortunately COVID came and it was a little bit disturbed, but still we had the experimental time use surveys and the experimental time use surveys to see what's happening. And unfortunately, it's only women. So this is a limitation, of course, of the study. But we expected, just as was told, we expected that these women would opt, they were free to choose. The only thing was 30 hours a week, not too much overtime to spare for holidays or something. So there were limitations, but they could work 4 days a week. They could work 5 days a week, even 6 days a week, shorter days. So we expected, as was expected by Hyung, that most of the women with children would choose for shorter days, to be earlier at home, to do some homework. But the opposite was true. More than 80% choose for a free day and a 4-day week. So they choose for the Wednesday, when children are at home in the afternoon in Belgium, or the Friday to prepare the weekend to have a 3-day weekend. So in fact, that would be 4 days work, 3 days weekend. Choices depended a little bit on the household composition, on work circumstances, choices of other colleagues you work with, so to coordinate with other colleagues at work. The availability of others in the family, of course, the partner to see. But in general, people choose for a 4-day work week and worked less than 8, 7.5 hours during 4 days. So what happened with this experiment, maybe just very briefly. So the idea was we only do it 1 year because it costs some money, of course. Then COVID came. In March, they decided to go back to the 30-hour week during COVID. Then after COVID, they decided to permanently go to a 30-hour work week. So now the whole organization worked 32 hours, but it was very well prepared. Also, the working time was very well prepared. They studied how to organize working time so that there would be no more pressure at work, so that it would be not to do the same work in a shorter time. So they decided to cut some things that were not so effective and things like that. So it's a very nice experiment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ignace. I ara li dono la paraula a Montserrat.
And now I'll hand the floor to Montserrat Pineda to answer the questions. Well, let's see. First of all, I'll reflect what you were saying when it came to women. I think what is very important is to establish a distinction What is the impact of different economic and labor law measures in terms of working time? And the other is if we're just referring to women. What I saying, no, we need to correct this gender-related discrimination. And if we have to carry out positive discrimination, so be it. We must state that this has to be done. It's not just a question of talking of generalist measures. We need measures which are effective across the board. I know you weren't saying in that sense, but I do think that we have to look at micro measures. I was talking before more macro question. Now let me go to what the 4 days with the experiment in Belgium and the 32 working hours. Now there are a series of tests we're carrying out with the Department of Economy and Civil Service. Is who is the end person responsible for this cultural change, is it just companies, corporations, public administrations, citizens? No, it goes far beyond that. And I think that when I gave you my example, the example I gave, and we're talking of I talk of schools, and the improvements need to be carried out there, precisely to be able to say that all these measures, which we must guarantee as a government administration, must be cross-cutting, they must be horizontal, they must be able to be implemented by all agents, by all players. There are cracks or gaps at research level. Says the speaker, what happens with the people who are working on the margins? What happens to them? What happens with small and medium-sized enterprises or self-employed? What happens with the guarantee of a reduced working week? Because often in these situations, they are the conflicting front line. There are issues which we must look at, and we must also, any solutions we have must also encompass them. And this new law must bear very much in mind the specific situations and also shifts within 32, 35 working hours. How do you deal with the shift work? And in our administration, we are seeking internal discussion on, especially in the health service. Think of the health service. We not just think of factories or companies. Think of all this structure, the health service, which it means that we must talk about how these measures will have a bearing on them. This year, in May this year, within the administration of the Generalitat, together with the trade unions, we have introduced a series of measures to favor life-work balance. I'm pointing these out with the examples of some actions. We have them a flexible timetable, which had been enjoyed by some civil servants, some local officials, but when it comes to flexi time and the permanent core working times, special maternity leaves, leaves for in terms of adoption. These are measures which we're looking at, and which are important. Also, special leave for pre-birth tests and measures which are necessary, and also in postpartum, and I'm putting all this, mentioning this here, because they are key, they are essential, and you must look at them. Compacting working time reduction for life-work balance. What happens if there is medical leave? That is something that is highly relevant. Interpretation criteria on how we can ensure leave for training, and also there's something else which is leave for families. What about single parent households? Question for leave for foster parenting, for adoption, all that is highly relevant. Also thinking of time and space, and two issues which are not approved in May, but are still being considered. For the first time, we recognize the fact that if you are suffered a loss, like grieving, that also has to be considered, sort of a leave for grieving, but also this is a pioneer measure. Also, if in the case of menopause and menstruation, that can also we should have leave implemented there. And something else which has to do with economic matters, the investment of the 20 million which we have earmarked for different measures in which local councils are using for this program for care. So we need to have spaces, not just for working women, but in particular for working women in certain groups. I'm thinking of single mothers, migrant women, who are the ones who are involved in care, and we forget about them when it comes, or we leave them out of time use policies. So we are looking at feminist policies and stating that this work-life balance, this is not the moment to do so, but and which have to do with this formulae, which we're looking at the Council for Labour Relations, with the measures concerning grieving and menstruation and their appropriate leave, which we shall put on the table to see consensus with social partners in Catalonia, but also an important element which we're looking at within the Council of Labour Relations to carry out recommendations agreed upon by all stakeholders to be able to highlight the right to disconnection, which is important and which will have an important impact. And let me conclude with mental health indicators. We are working within the framework of the agreement which we are having as a government. Precisely, it is a subject which we have discussed with her and we shall be developing. I don't have the data. Later, if you can, we can give them to you. But there are many data which, and this is a subject which for us, and within this framework for Catalonia, we wish to work upon, because it's not just to follow on the a labour risk logic, but to look at the need to generate active policies, bearing in mind the need for equality. So it's a social transformation which we need to carry out, and also state that we need a reform not just in the labour system, but of the whole capitalist system, which does need proposals for a feminist or a gender perspective economy. And with the new regional minister for economy, we have started talking about how we can have new economy. Great, thank you very much. Well, Thanks, Montserrat. Thank all of you for your comments, for your questions, and to the speakers for their intervention. And now we have a break to have lunch. And we shall come back here at 2:30 for proposal and research for future law in this field. Thank you. Thank you.